introduction.
There we go.
All right, friends, we apologize. We're half an hour late for all the technical difficulties. And this is going to be Ordinary Takes number 6. Ordinary Takes is a podcast version of the radio show Teacher on the Radio that I do at Tennessee Tech. And it's also a collaboration with my fanzine, Ordinary Space, that I do with Rick Quinn, who's unfortunately not here today. But it is a theology pop culture fanzine that he and I started several years ago. So, and I think Harry Smith is a theology like unto himself. So it does overlap the mysticism and the magic and the miraculous and the weird theology as the weird. So I've got two wonderful guests here with me to talk about Harry Smith. His face is on the screen. I will pull that slide down here in just a minute. But my name is Andrew Smith. I'm in Cookeville, Tennessee. And for my day job, to be able to afford all of my hobbies, I work at Tennessee Tech. And Michael White had a connection with Cookeville, lasted many years. And I met him finally because of Ann Waldman, great poet, American poet, who is one of our connections that brings the three of us here together, which is the Naropa Institute in Boulder and the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. But Michael White is joining us from his home in Brush Creek, Tennessee, his ashram, his personal art studio, library, and museum. I've visited it once, and I want to go back immediately and live there under his nice, beautiful Oriental rug that he's sitting on top of right now. Michael White joins us from Brush Creek, Tennessee. And joining us from the suburbs of Detroit, the Motor City, a veritably beatnik place, if there ever was one, place where John Sinclair of the White Panther Party is from, and the MC5 and all kinds of other great things. John Wright I also met in Boulder back in the day when I should have met Michael, when I was traipsing around in my long hair and my weird clothing, and I was on the Allen Ginsberg. I was one of many young poets who ran to Boulder to chase after Allen, and I got to take his class, and it was amazing. And we love Allen so much, and Allen, of course, loved Harry Smith so much. So today our topic is the American artist Harry Smith. And so for the first thing, first of all, this is gonna be about a double question. Why should anyone care about Harry Smith? And the second question is, one of your favorite Harry Smith memories, since you both had the honor of meeting him, and I'm literally like a little fanboy grifting off of your vibes. I want to get some secondhand smoke from your Harry Smith vibes. I want to catch a contact buzz from you guys on Harry Smith today. So I'm going to try to tell StreamYard to stop sharing that beautiful picture of Harry, so we can see your beautiful faces. And I'm gonna guess I'll go counter. Is that clockwise? I'll go clockwise around my screen. I've known John longer than you, Michael. So beauty before age. John Wright, tell us about why anybody should care about Harry Smith, and tell us one of your favorite Harry Smith memories.
Okay. I would say that in any number of fields, he's just somebody that maybe you haven't heard of, but he is incredibly influential. And he really was this polymath, just somebody who was into all these different arts and practices. Let me just mention too, like in filmmaking, he was I believe one of the first people to paint on film, and was a huge pioneer in like abstract film in the 1940s. And so a lot of things that you just kind of take for granted now, he was doing that first, like way back in the day. And then I'd say my main obsession with him, and it's hard to say, but I would say what his main impact on the culture has been is through music, and through his work as a collector, as an anthologist, as a musicologist, and especially in putting out this landmark anthology, the Folkways Anthology of American Folk Music, which came out in 1952 and was a collection of old recordings made mostly in the 1920s, and that was hugely influential on the folk movement in starting in the 1950s. Everybody, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, they were like obsessed with these things, and they learned the songs, they took the melodies, and wrote new lyrics to them. They used the tropes and the styles in these songs. And since this came out, there's just been like generations of musicians who have been influenced by this, whether they know it or not. So to me, that's like the main connection with him is probably through the music, even though he had many, other facets. And,
John, you might not know this about me because I've run from it for half my life, but I'm really a Deadhead, and I love the Grateful Dead so much. And Jerry Garcia said that the folk music he knew when he was growing up was all the commercial folk music, which would be on the radio at the time for him. So he mentioned
Trio, and,
yeah, exactly.
Nothing wrong with that, but
Peter Puff the Magic Dragon, Peter, Paul, and Mary, right? And so Leaving on a Jet Plane, John Denver, so that was like pop folk writ large at that time period. And he said Harry Smith was the gateway for him to the deep roots of the tradition. And so just to know that the lineage, all of our lineage, if you're a Deadhead, Harry Smith is in your lineage. It reminds me of how Alan used to say that we're all kind of descendants of Walt Whitman, right? So he's the visionary behind the visionaries. And so for people who are into weird folk music and alt folk and psychedelic folk and all of these subgenres of folk music, you can't really get there without coming through the anthology. And so also what's really important that I felt I had to interrupt before Michael started was to say that they kept him in rent. They paid his rent. They bought his coffee.
Their foundation. The
subsidized.
That foundation was kind of paying his bills, right? And later years.
So they were his primary patron late in life was a grant from the Rex Foundation, which was the Grateful Dead basically kept Harry alive, toward the end of his life. So we haven't got to the second part of the question. So what's the second answer? One really good, your first good Harry Smith story. We'll probably get to more.
Okay. And of many, and this is the one I was mentioning before we went on it. And this would be like the first time I saw Harry Smith is I was out in Boulder and Europa in, I'm thinking it's 1988. And I was out there visiting some friends for a few days who were students there, and kind of mooched on to, got like a pass from Ann Waldman or something, was able to check out classes and things. And so it's like, oh, there's going to be this showing of film up at CU in this auditorium. And Stan Brakhage, the avant-garde filmmaker who was a professor there at CU, was going to put on this like showing of Harry Smith's films. Like, who's Harry Smith? So I was trying to take in as many things as possible. So I go in this big auditorium, and full of people, and then there's just like weird, little old man, this like little gnome, and obviously he's somebody that everybody is in awe of. Like okay, and so the films start up, and it's early abstractions. It's like his first films made in the late 1940s, and there's music. There's a soundtrack for it, and the music is the Butthole Surfers, which is this I was living in Texas at the time, and they were, this like crazy punk band that I'd seen perform like countless times or whatever. So here's this film of this guy, and then like, oh my God, this, so I'm just like losing it over this. And the films are very short. They're a couple minutes long, and they run through them, and then Harry's like, let's play them again or something. So they rewind the films, and they run them again, and this time it's the soundtrack is like Enrico Caruso in like 1902 or something, like scratchy, opera, of Caruso singing. So I'm just like okay, and I'm pretty sure I after that kind of came up and glommed up to me like, well, Harry, I'm from Texas, I love the Butthole Surfers, and I think he probably just brushed me off. I don't even remember. I'm sure I must have tried to. So that's my first memory of him, like my first encounter with him. So.
All right. Well, I remember Allen Ginsberg commenting to me one time that Harry was famous to the famous and unknown to everybody else. And that's really the story. If you're Jerry Garcia, you know who Harry Smith is. If you're Bob Dylan, you know who Harry Smith is. If you're an avant-garde filmmaker or deep into film, you know who Harry Smith is. If you're a graphic artist, you know who Harry Smith is. But if you're just a regular guy out on the streets, you have no idea who Harry is. So Harry was famous to the famous and unknown to everyone else. And he was just an incredible genius. And to get to hang out in Harry's room was one of the great delights in life. And I would be at Naropa in the summertime for about 2 weeks every summer during the course of the 80s and early 90s. And once Harry was there and I got to know him, I would spend the morning, I would go first thing in the morning to Harry's room and check in with him, and then do the events all day. And then in the evening, check back in with him. And just loved the guy incredibly. Walking into Harry's room, you open the door and there was 2 rooms in the apartment. And in one room, he had, in the living room kitchen area, in the living room part of it, he had a log and a boulder. And the log was his couch, and the boulder was his chair. And that was his furniture. And Harry taped everything. Harry kept a tape recorder going all the time. And so I asked him once, what kind of tape recorder he got? And he showed me, and so I went and bought one, just like his, And then I ran mine all the time. And one time I showed up at Harry's room, and there was like 4 tape recorders going. There was other students in there too, and we all had our tape recorders going. So there was tapes all around the room. Harry just loved it. And then in Harry's bedroom, there was no bed. And over in the corner of the room was this pile of dirty clothes and rags, and he slept on that. And the rest of the room was filled up with boxes and shelves full of stuff. And Harry just collected all the time. And he was collecting packs of cards and all kinds of books. And he had a shrine set up in his room. And it was a tanka, a Tibetan image of a wrathful deity sitting up on a table. And then in front of it, he had a little bronze dog about this tall that was with his head up, that he had positioned looking up at the tanka. And between the dog and the tanka was a broken eggshell. And it was beautiful. It was just gorgeous. And it just drew you in. And it was just one of those things. All around Harry's apartment was stuff like that. So I've got other stories about being in Harry's apartment. And I got a great story about having dinner with Harry and Gregory Corso. So we'll get into those if we have to.
So I'm just so thrilled that we were able to convene this summit, and I'm thinking this is kind of like the Jack Kerouac School alumni Zoom for people who love Harry Smith. And I think he died in 91, and I got there in 91. I think his vibe must have still been kind of wafting around the place when I got there, and I'm trying to think what it is about him that just draws me to him so magnetically. And I think it might be this hoarder / curator thing. So a compilation album so he was dealing in 78s, which were like 45s. So it was like one song on one side, one song on the other side. And so a compilation album back in the day would be, maybe 2 sides. Oh, John, what is that? Let me unmute you. Wait, what is that?
It's a 78. It's not very interesting. I've played it. It's just like some dumb pop music. This thing's like a 1/4 inch thick. Anyway, I pulled out a couple of my 78s just to, hey kids, this is what music.
So how many 78s do you have?
I have a handful. I've never been a collector. A lot of these I found on the streets when I was living in Brooklyn. Like I found, this is amazing. This is Vocalion, which is a record label that some of the Folkways anthologies things are on. And this is some kind of like a Yiddish klezmer music or something. And I just found this in a trash pile in Brooklyn.
So
I'm not much of a collector, but
There's a writer for the New Yorker, and she's a lot younger, and also she's a woman in a sector of nerddom where there's a lot of like older guys like us sitting around nerding out about this stuff. So her name is Amanda. She's the New Yorker, one of the New Yorker music critics, but she has a book called "Do Not Sell at Any Price," and it's about 78 collectors, and it's a fantastic book. I can't recommend it enough. And she has a long section about Harry in it, and she also has there's another author who's inspired by Harry called Hari Kunzuru. And he's Indian, but he's from the United Kingdom, but he lives in Brooklyn, I think. And he has a book called White Tears, and it's about old white dudes' obsession with the blues and young white hipsters' obsession with the blues. And I think it's subliminally like a critique of Jack White and Third Man and all the retro everything. But it's so beautiful.
That guy's writing, yeah.
The book is so well done, and it's so scathing. It's almost like a parody of like people like us, a bunch of white dudes getting together to talk about like old timey things.
Yeah, for sure.
But I walked into a record store in Atlanta about a month and a half ago, and I never even noticed the 78s when I go into these record stores. So I walk into this record store that I've never been to before. That I have been to before, and I never noticed that they had an entire wall of 78s. And they weren't sorted. They weren't organized. Some of them had sleeves, some of them didn't. And it was just literally a wall. And I just sat there and just looked at every single one. I had no idea what I was looking at. I'd heard of some of the artists, had not heard of some of the artists. So Harry could have put out, like a 15 song, two-sided LP, and he's also not Alan Lomax, right? He's not only going to go and do it this way, which was Alan Lomax seems kind of to me, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but like the straight version of Harry, but like Harry's the Harry version of Harry. But 84 songs into these categories, and then the book that goes with it. So it seems to me that he's the now it's no big deal for me, John. I put out about a 6 hour, maybe it was 7 hour. I put a 6 or 7 hour Spotify playlist called The Election Season. It was going to be the Election Day playlist, but I turned it into the election. And it helped me emotionally cope with the days preceding the election. And then all the way through, I listened to it all the way through the inauguration. And it was political music, positive political music on my side, which is definitely the left side. But so now somebody can put out this massive curated playlist on Spotify in a couple of hours, and you can have actually a masterpiece, and then Spotify will suggest its algorithms are actually brilliant, and it will actually suggest stuff that you actually want to hear, and then you'll add that. And Harry was the first algorithm, so I guess
he made the first playlist. He made the first mixtape. You can look at the anthology like that.
Talk about, riff on that for me for a while, John, and then Michael come after him about this idea of his the excess. There seems to be he wasn't only a filmmaker, and he wasn't only a music collector. And even like the way he gets called a magi or a shaman, those terms now have been cheapened, because Jim Morrison. And I love the Doors, but when that cheapens the idea. And Harry was there in the Northwest, and I'm talking too much, and I invited you guys to talk. So I'm gonna so John and Michael and this, we're just gonna freestyle for as long as you guys are willing to put up with me, and I'm willing to put up with you. So go for it, John.
Well, let me address in like sort of his collecting obsession and how he came to accumulate these billions of old 78s and then eventually mix them into the anthology. That apparently he started record collecting in about 1940. He was living in the Pacific Northwest, and I think the story, like kind of what set him off is he was going by a thrift store and he heard Uncle Dave Macon, who is one of the artists on the anthology. He's like one of my favorites or whatever. He heard like an Uncle Dave Macon record playing and was just like, what is this? Goes in there and gets it. And at the time, you could just get these things for nothing. the styles of music had changed. Music had really changed a lot, say in like the decade when the late 1920s, when the anthology stuff came from, to the 1930s had just been this sea change in American popular music. And so there was all this older stuff that had just been, even in a short time, had become kind of archaic, and there were all these old 78s. And then this is interesting, is once World War II started, they were bringing these records out to the Pacific Northwest to melt them down for shellac, to coat airplanes, like warplanes. And at some point, Harry was working in the Boeing factory in Seattle, like outside of Seattle. He was 4F. He was ineligible for the draft. I think he had like a curvature of the spine or something. And so he was getting this really well-paid job, like squunching up in little places in B-29 bombers, and I think was bringing in a pretty decent paycheck and could just buy these records. And so he just got like everything, like every genre of music, just like thousands and thousands of records, and he started gaining like knowledge about them and just took in everything, like every style of music. And then just to kind of skip ahead, so he just had this huge hoard of records. And then at some point he had moved to New York and was just kind of done with it. You know, I've gone through my record collecting phase, and that was nice, but now I'm on to my next obsession. And so he wanted to sell his collection to Mo Ash, who was the president, whatever, head of Folkways Records. Like, I want to sell you this whole stuff of like, you know, everything. And it's like, well, Harry, why don't you put together an anthology of what you feel is the best, you know, kind of the cream of American folk music. And so out of just this huge trove of millions of records, he selected what he thought were these exemplars of American folk music and these 84 cuts. And so that's kind of the process that he used to come to this point where he boiled it down to these 84 songs. So that's just...
All right, I'll pick it up from there. And so Folkways then released I believe it was 5 or 6 albums, LPs, you know, 33s, in a beautiful big old package called the Anthology of American Folk Music, which was released in 1952. Do I have that right? You guys know? And so here were these 84 songs that Harry had selected out of this huge pile of 78s that he had collected over the years. And it was what we now call Americana. And it was music recorded from 1927 to 1932. And it was the hillbilly music and country blues, and had Blind Willie Johnson and Furry Lewis, and on the blues side, Mississippi John Hurt, and then on the country hillbilly side, it had Doc Boggs and the Carter family and Uncle Dave Macon and those guys. But when this music came out in 1952, it exploded onto the scene in New York City, and anybody that cared about folk music got a hold of this thing and listened to it. And the artists of the day mined that stuff. It took a few years for it to work its way into the culture, but on Bob Dylan's first album, there's cuts from the Harry Smith Anthology, and Bob Dylan mined the Harry Smith Anthology for albums to come, and even still albums he did in the 80s and 90s have tracks from the Harry Smith Anthology on it. And the folk music craze that exploded out of the village in the late 50s and early 60s came right smack out of the Harry Smith Anthology. And Harry got a Lifetime Achievement Grammy as a result of it. And Harry knew the famous quote from Plato's Republic, where Plato warns the rulers of the Republic that if there's a change in the style of music, beware. You know, you better crunch it. You better stop it immediately, because when the style of music changes, it's going to bring a revolution of society. And when Harry accepted his Grammy Award, and in the new release of the Harry Smith anthology put out by the Smithsonian, there's a little DVD of Harry receiving his Grammy Award. And it's amazing. You see, Harry's a little wizened guy, long, crinkly beard and long hair. And he stumbles up the stages and then he says, I'm so happy to be here. And my dreams have come true. I've seen society change through music. And it's so true that
they practically had to carry him up. He could barely walk.
Yeah.
They almost needed to bring him to the stage, and he could barely you could barely see him. The podium almost eclipses him. So everyone needs to go and watch the movie, because it's now on Amazon Prime. I think they only re-released it digitally very recently, called The Old Weird America. And the kind of the dean of American rock criticism, Greil Marcus, of course, John, he's written about our favorite band, the Sex Pistols, one of our favorite bands, the Sex Pistols, in Lipstick Traces. And Greil Marcus is a bit of a pill for me to swallow. He seems to be enamored with his own understanding of everything, and he loves Dylan, but he doesn't like the Dead. He loves the Sex Pistols, but maybe he doesn't like Gibby Haynes or whatever. I don't know that for a fact, but I love Greil Marcus. I have to take him in doses. But Marcus, in his book, seems to be saying something that almost seems ridiculous to be talking about for us in the waning days of Trumpism. What I hope is the waning days of Trumpism, but this idea of like the true America. So he talks about this idea of the old free America in his book about Dylan. He has a book that's basically about Dylan and Harry Smith, and he says, I love that Marcus. I'm paraphrasing, of course. He basically says, I love this idea of the old free America, but that sounds too much, probably like a, Budweiser commercial, or like a song that, one of these Nashville pop stars would sing. And he said, but it's the old weird America. And maybe that's what we like about these songs. And maybe that's what Jerry liked about those songs. We haven't addressed this topic about why this time period, right? So I remember, this is super, like, not as in the deep as Harry, but I remember as a kid watching American Graffiti, which was George Lucas before Star Wars. And there's that scene where the older guy who still wants to hang out with the high school kids, his character's name is Milner. And he's driving around this girl, and she's threatening him, because he's too old for her. And he says, the Beach Boys come on the radio. And he said, I hate that surfing stuff. Rock and roll died with Buddy Holly. And I remember all through growing up, thinking that was like, Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly, that was like the pure, Harry kind of set this bar that everything had to be between 1927 and 1933, 34. And that's the beginning of the recorded era. And then when the record industry apparently went to go downhill due to the Great Depression. So the 78 boom was going in late 20s, early 30s. And then there was this tapering due to the Great Depression. And then, like you were saying, John, because of the shellac being, repurposed for the war. And I just wanted to notice also, John, that our old pal Chris Funkhauser is on the stream right now, listening in right now. So I want to tip it back to you, John, but you take it away from there, John. I don't think I need to prompt you any. I think we're well prompted here. So let's just keep going around the little triangle here. We'll each take our turns. So John, you're up.
Is my mic muted? Oh, okay. So maybe I could talk a little. What were these records? Where did they come from? And so just really briefly, starting about in the early 1920s, the commercial recording industry discovered that there was this market, and there was this amazing talent pool of rural-based black and white music in the American South. They had first kind of gotten an inkling of this with jazz bands, like starting in like the late teens, and then that kind of led them to, there's this more kind of primitive, rootsy stuff down there. And so these record companies started sending talent scouts and started doing these recording sessions in some of the larger cities in the South. They would go to like Atlanta or Dallas or Charlotte, North Carolina, or Bristol, Tennessee. They'd put out a word. We're looking for music. We're looking for talent. And people would come in and they would audition and like, okay, you're all right. And they didn't really have much of a respect or appreciation for the music, but they had the sense of like, these people will buy this. You know, working class Southerners of whatever color will buy their kind of music. And so it just kept rolling through the 20s. And starting in about 1925, they got better recording equipment, like electronic recording equipment, and were able to get like better quality recording. And so that was the golden age, like late 1920s. They're just discovering all, you know, Jimmy Rogers, the Carter family, just all these amazing, you know, Blind Lemon Jefferson, these amazing blues and country artists, getting them on record. And there was a market for this stuff. It was relatively prosperous for working people. You know, there's still a lot of poverty, but people they wanted to hear their own stuff, their like own culture. So to have like a wind-up Victrola and be able to buy a record and hear, you know, your kind of music was a big deal. So there was a small market for this. And so keep in mind that this was commercial music. This wasn't the guys like the Lomaxes didn't get around until like the 1930s to, you know, going way up the holler in Appalachia or going to the prison farms in the South and finding the obscure, really off the, you know, beaten track music. This was like a commercial product that big record companies like Victor were, you know, putting on 78 and selling to the people. And so I wanted to and so to kind of jump ahead, that famous Greil Marcus quote about the old weird America, and I think about that. And first of all, it was not that weird. You know, this was the kind of music that people wanted to hear in this demographic. It was commercially available. It had to be commercial, or there was no point in recording it. And of course, when the Depression hit, this market crashed. You know, no, people couldn't afford records anymore. And then by the time the record companies started recording again, the music had like really changed within a few years, and people were playing like in different styles. Like somebody like Robert Johnson, who was a little bit younger than the blues artists on the Folkways anthology, he came of age listening to records. That's kind of meta. That in the 30s, that was the first generation of recording artists who got there not only from the tradition, the oral tradition, but they listened to records and they listened to radio. And guys like Bill Monroe, they were still, you know, playing these old traditional tunes and same instrument, same style, but they were listening to jazz, they were listening to older country artists, and so the music really changed. And it's not, oh, the stuff on the anthology is authentic, and then after that it's just a bunch of commercial. You know, it was always commercial. They're always, you know, trying to sell records, but there was this huge before and after, like with the Great Depression. And then you add in like that and World War II and post that. Here's my other thing with the old weird America. Like, wasn't that weird, and it wasn't that old. You think about 1952, and you go back to the late 1920s, that's not that far. That's like 20, 25 years. But there had been so much of a change in music and in like American culture and consumerism that it just seemed like this chasm that opened up. And so think about that time period. And I've thought about this, that imagine if I was like, you know, man, I was at this Salvation Army, and I found these old cassettes, and this stuff is unbelievable. It's Nirvana and Wu-Tang Clan. You know, that stuff is amazing. I can't believe this even existed, you know, so long ago. And you know, oh my God, there's still guys alive in these bands, and maybe I can, you know, book them at my 90s revival festival where 23 people are going to show up. That was another, for these folk artists, that was another thing in the 50s. Is like, oh my God, these people are still alive. You know, they sounded so ancient, and, you know, Doc Boggs is still alive. You know, Mississippi John Hurt is still alive. And so they would book them at the folk festivals, and, you know, some of these people were able to make a decent living.
John, you are so right. I'm interrupting Michael's turn here, but you are so right.
No.
I saw a kid in a cafe, working in a cafe, wearing a Bad Brains T-shirt, and he wasn't around when the Bad Brains were.
Yeah.
You know, and like, and also too, the kids in my like Guardians of the Galaxy, you know, Stranger Things, these movies that have come out that kind of capture the 80s, 90s vibe. Like the kids in my classes, like they literally are blown away by stuff, anything to do with the 80s and 90s. I mean, they're absolute, because they were all born in 2002. They're absolutely blown away by the 80s and 90s. And as a matter of fact, when I started, I've been doing a mixtape project in my curriculum for years now. And they just all make playlists. For a very short period, they were making mixed CDs, but now they all just make playlists on whatever platform they prefer. I prefer Spotify just because it's easier to share that way. Has a social aspect to it. But I remember teaching this a couple years ago, and I had a student who was already into kind of all the retro stuff. He went out thrifting, and he bought a bunch of boom boxes. He bought a bunch of old Walkmans. He started buying up old cassettes at Goodwill. And he figured out how to take his iPhone and play music and use the external jack. And he would bootleg onto cassette. So he would make cassettes recorded off of his iPod or his iPhone because he wanted to have it on a cassette and not on his phone. So he actually literally ripped it to cassette from the phone. And he was completely into it, like legit into it. I just was like, ah!
But yeah, I guess there's this yearning for authenticity and realness, and it exists somewhere in the, you know, in the misty past. And I imagine people growing up in all the stereotypical sterile plasticness of the 50s and hearing this stuff, which was not that long ago. And many of these artists were still alive, and like, this is it. This is so much better than my awful suburban life, and you know, I want this. I want to learn how to play these songs and grasp, you know, something real, something authentic. Very, you know, understandable impulse.
All right, I'll pick it up here. This is the Smithsonian release. I wish I had the original, but it costs like $900 or something to get one of the originals. But if you can see here, on the cover is what they call a monocord, and that is a single-stringed instrument. And then up at the top of the monocord is a knob, and there's a hand adjusting the string there, and that's the hand of God, and setting the tone of the music. And this was, you know, for Harry, the image of creation. And so this is the 84 songs that Harry chose, and it has the booklet with Harry's notes on each of the songs and all that stuff. And this is what the dynamite of the counterculture and the folk music revival that happened in the late 50s and 60s, and where they all learned how to play. So, but that's not all that Harry did by any means. Harry recorded himself. Not only did he collect, he also recorded. And he recorded Allen Ginsberg's album, New York Blues. And there's a picture of Harry on there. And he recorded the very first Fugs record. And before that, when Harry was a kid, when he was 14 and 15 years old, he was growing up on the northwest coast, and there was an Indian tribe, and he got himself a tape recorder and went out to the Indian tribe, and whenever they would do a dance and do their chants, he was recording it. And one of his early recordings was the Kiowa peyote meetings. And Harry went and lived with the Kiowa Indians for a while. He told me a story that they would all get drunk, and they would go out on the streets, and they would be walking down the streets, and the cops would come and arrest all the Indians. And they wouldn't arrest him. And he was standing there like, what's going on, you know? And he said they would arrest the Indians, and they would arrest them for what they called staggering. And that was good enough, you know, so they would throw the Indians in jail. But when Harry made his selections, back to the anthology, when Harry made his selections, he made more than the 84. And the folklore people, folkways people, cut it down to the 84. But eventually, all of it was released. And there is an album from Revenant Records of the other cuts that were not included that Harry chose, that would have been albums 7, 8, and 9, or whatever they were, to put on there. So that's sort of available as well. Got a really nice little book with it. So that's fun to hear as well. And then just recently, some people called Dust to Digital have dug back in to the old 78s, and they have released the B-sides of all of the songs that Harry dug up. You know, back in those days, you had one song on one side and another song on the other side, and that was all you got. And so these people dug in, and the B-side would be the same artist as the A-side, you know. And Harry sometimes chose the B-sides, not the A-sides, but the other side of the record has now been released in this amazing little recording called Harry Smith's B-side. It has a great little book in it as well. So, and then Harry recorded everything with his tape recorder. And so my first meeting with Harry, I'll tell this story real quick. I was at Naropa in 1988, and they were having a performance of Polynesian dance. And so I went in and into the Naropa little auditorium. It was a junior high school. And have I frozen up? Uh-oh.
Michael, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, yeah. My image froze on the screen. So
keep going. We're on a roll, brother, and we've got.
Okay.
Michael, let me just check in here. We've got Leanne Brown and Tony Torn on the call. We got Chris. So this is a Jack Kerouac School family reunion going on right here, and I have a friend from the Tennessee area who wants to talk about the Holy Modal Rounders, and we got a shout out to Ed Sanders out on the comments as well. Michael, you were in the middle of trying to tell us a Harry story.
All right. So this was my first meeting with Harry, and I'd gone to this event in the evening at Naropa, and it was a Polynesian dance event. And I went in and went up right to the middle of the auditorium and up on some bleachers halfway up and sat down. And as I was sitting there, I was there about 10 minutes before it started. Allen Ginsberg walked in, and beside him was this wizened-looking old guy his shoulders were really bent down, and this long straggly hair, and his hair looked like it had turned white and then yellowed after that. And I thought, now that is one of the most interesting characters I've ever seen in my life. I've got to go ask Allen who this is and figure out a way, can I meet this guy? And so I was thinking all this, and then Allen went and sat right down on the front row, and Harry walks up into the bleachers and makes his way up into the bleachers, and then comes over and sits down right beside me. And I say, well, good evening. How you doing? And he says, I hope you're not one of these guys that talks all the time. And I said, oh, don't worry. I won't mess with you. And he was bringing out his tape recorder. And he tape recorded the whole event. I kept my mouth shut. But then I had an entrance to Harry and got to know him. So it was great fun to get to meet him that way. And he had a very distinctive, whiny kind of New York sort of voice. I don't know why it was New York, because he grew up in the East, on the West Coast, but a very distinctive voice. So that's some stories about Harry's recording career and my first meeting with him. So, Andrew, my screen's froze up. Am I froze up on your end?
No, you sound great to us.
Okay.
You know what? I feel like, John, you need to play us a song. I feel like it's time to do that. So from Leanne and Tony, they're starting something called Tender Vinyl Literary Audio, and they've placed their link in the comments, and so we'll definitely have to give that a listen. And about while John's getting his banjo ready, about recording everything. I don't remember what Jag I was on, but Naropa has a lot of audio like on their website from the there's a Jack Kerouac School audio archive online. And one time I was browsing around there, Leanne, and I found recordings of your class that I took. And this is freaking me out that it was 30 years ago this coming summer that I took your class. And then shortly after that, you came to Detroit and we hung out with Chris and George Tish, and many other wonders have, and it's been about 20 years since I met you, Tony. I met you when I went to visit Leanne, and I was at my cousin's wedding, and that's been forever ago too. John, what are we going to hear from the anthology?
We're going to hear the Wagoner's Lad by Buell Casey, and that's one of the cool things about the anthology is the names, you know, just some of these people, you know, Blind Willie Johnson, or you know, Doc Boggs. Just who are these guys? So Buell Casey was he was from Kentucky. He was an ordained Baptist minister, and that's another thing. It's like, you know, people think, oh, these people, they're all these poor sharecroppers and coal miners making this music. Well, you know, not really. You know, the idea was that you became a musician so you didn't have to be a sharecropper or a coal miner. This wasn't just people picking on the back porch after a weary day at work. They were, you know, trying to make it as musicians. And then some of them, like Buell Casey and Bascom Omar Lunsford, were sort of from the more educated, you know, rural middle class or something. So it wasn't just this like poverty music. Oh, okay, so anyway, Buell Casey, ordained Baptist minister from Kentucky, banjo player, recorded a lot of folk material in like the 20s. One person who got a lot of the stuff on record at the time. Anyway, so this is a song called the Wagoner's Lad, and it's very early on the anthology. I think it's about number 6 or 7. And Harry tried to have the first cuts were ballads that had made it from the British Isles over to Appalachia and had been, you know, kind of changed and Americanized, but had their roots in like traditional ballads from the old country. Anyway,
right quick, John, before you start, Michael, I'm going to remove our pictures from the screen while John plays, but we're still going to be here, so don't go anywhere, okay? But we're going to take you and I off our pictures off the screen while John sings to us.
Okay, and see my banjo a little bit. Okay, so Wagoner's Lad. Oh, hard is the fortune of all womankind. They're always controlled. They're always controlled by their parents, till they are wives and slaves to their husbands the rest of their lives. I've been a poor girl, my fortune is sad. I've always been courted by my lover's lad. He courted me daily, by night and by day, and then he is loaded and going away. Your parents don't like me because I am poor. They say I'm not worthy of entering your door. I work for my living, my money's my own, and if they don't like me, they can leave me alone. Your horses are hungry, go feed them some hay. Come sit down here by me, as long as you may. My horses ain't hungry, they won't eat your hay. So fare you well, darling, I'll feed on the way. squeezing your whip is to bend. Come sit down here by me, as long as you can. My wagon is squeezing, my whip's in my hands. So fare you well, darling, no longer to stand.
Yay! So what haven't we covered? It seems like there's got to be much more. I think I want to just talk for a minute, since it was brought up in the comments, about artists that have tried to stay true to this lineage. So we have the obvious ones, which are Bob Dylan and the Dead, and so just like you can't have Ginsberg without Walt Whitman, you can't really have Dylan and the Dead without the Harry Smith anthology. But somebody brought up in the chat the Holy Mold Arounders, and I think we at least need to mention them and the whole psychedelic folk music, psychedelic folk movement that kind of still permeates. It's been called acid folk. There's many contemporary folk who do that sort of, I don't know, style. But then there's also, I think, John, you might be more aware of this too, the kind of scene where you go, like in Smithville. Not the made up Smithville of Harry Smith, but in here, literally in Smithville, Tennessee, they have the Fiddler's Jamboree, and you have these old time festivals where these folks just literally come out and play old time music. So I think you have like these maybe 2 lanes, maybe, or 3 lanes. You've got like the old time lane, but then you have the more psychedelic folk lane, which the old coffee house kind of lane. What do we need to say about people like the Holy Mold Arounders? And there's got to be some other ones. they seem like we mentioned the Fugs. There's definitely like the New York kind of boat. So all the different Seeger, the Lost City Ramblers or whatever they were called.
David Johansen, did a thing called the Harry Smith Project, and or the Harry Smith. David Johansen and the Harry Smiths. He had a band called the Harry Smiths.
Right.
Yeah.
Michael, since you have it right there, grab that again and read us some of the other people that are on here in our comment thread. They're going to jump into, and so we're going to come up with a good collaborative list here of everybody who's in there. So we got Michael Hurley and Stephen Said from Chris and from Tony on the stream. John, are you familiar with the Holy Mold Arounders? Because
God, well, let me. And here's the story: is when I guess I was about 18, and I just graduated from high school, and I was this miserable, angsty kid, and was going through all this stuff, and my music. I think I was maybe just discovering punk. This would have been like about 1977 or so, and I grew up in a fundamentalist, like a singing church. So I had that in me. This was in the South. It was in Louisiana. Cajun music that was around, country music, which I just kind of scoffed at, or though some of it seemed kind of cool. And then me and a friend of mine went over to a guy who was like a year older than us, and was like the cool guy in our high school, the one hipster guy at this really square, jockish high school or whatever. Went over to his apartment. He's playing these records, and one of them was the Fugs, and it was like really obscene, and So I was getting off on that, the kind of irreverent, obscenity, the quality of the Fugs. But this is cool, So I discovered that, and then at the same time, I think like the Holy Mold Arounders. So at 18, 19, and years later, like made the connection. And so very early on, I was like, turned on to that music, and just about them, they were some of these young folkies, in New York scene, maybe like the late 50s, early 60s, and there were guys that, and total respect to them, like people like the new Lost City Ramblers, who we need to play it exactly like Uncle Dave Macon did, and I'm really going to work on my clawhammer banjo and my fiddle style, and really trying to play these artists, these songs as they played it. And then there were guys like the Holy Modal Rounders who were like taking psychedelics and just really going off in these crazy directions. And we're still like really good musicians, and we're either playing the songs or writing new lyrics, using the melodies. So there were these kind of like, you know, two divergent paths, I think, of what people did with this music and this material. And so they're a great example of the one kind of left-handed crazy path.
And there's got to be some people right now that are on that visionary train. But there was something I bought an album at like a used bin, and my vinyl collection when I was in Detroit, and I lost most of them, but it was like maybe 100 albums or something. And I was very late, you know. I mean, I thought I had discovered everything alternative folk. Don't laugh at me, John, but I remember when I first heard Nick Drake, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and I thought, this is it, you know. I've gotten to the end of the road here. This is the most obscure, you know. And now you have so many artists, you know, that are so like riffing off of the kind of style that Nick Drake did, and they're like in every movie and in every Starbucks playlist, you know. So you have the kind of, I mean, and don't hate me also, because I love like, say, like Mumford and Sons would be another example of that, you know. And I mentioned earlier in the call Peter, Paul and Mary and John Denver, and I love all of it. But there was something about hearing the Holy Modal Rounders, and I got them on a compilation album that I bought for like $2 in a used bin in one of the defunct Detroit record stores, and it was a song called Blues in the Bottle. And I think I listened to that song just over and over and over again, and there was just something. They just put a little bit of something on there. Maybe they, you know, filtered it through like a bong or something. You know, I mean, it was the same thing, but with a bong. You know, and it just I don't know. It blew
they heard a recording somewhere, and they half remembered the lyrics, and so I know that song, and they just made up other stuff. You know, like made up kooky lyrics, or they didn't remember them or heard them, which is like part of the folk process. That's what happens when things are, you know, they probably heard they were stoned in some guy's apartment in the East Village in 1958 and heard Prince Albert Hunt's recording, and then, you know, half remembered it. And
hey, Michael, did you send out my link? I think the party's about to get crashed by a friend of yours. Do you want to introduce him?
Oh, is this Ron Whitehead?
Yeah, if anybody else wants to crash the party, hey, Leanne and Tony, if you guys want to crash the party, hit my messenger up, and I'll send you the link. I think this is about to get wild. Go ahead and introduce your friend, Michael.
Well, Ron Whitehead is a true beat poet in his own right, latter day, and a wonderful guy. He was great friends with Hunter S. Thompson, Ferlinghetti. Has been around for years. He's about perhaps to become the poet laureate of Kentucky. Grew up in rural Kentucky playing basketball way back on the dirt roads of northern rural Kentucky up by the Ohio River, but had poetry in his bones and could not be anything else but a great poet. And I've gotten to know Ron in the last couple of years, and it's been a delight to listen to his CDs and to collect his books. He's a great poet. He's a world traveler, and just an inspiration, and one of the wildest Kentucky poets that have ever emerged out of the hills of northern Kentucky. So
Ron, I think, you know, Michael has been trying to get me to talk to you for months. He emails me about every 3 weeks and says, "Have you called Ron Whitehead yet?" And now he invited you to crash our Zoom, our StreamYard party here. Ron, welcome to the stream. And as a point of entry, tell us how you are affiliated with Harry Smith in whatever fashion you want to be.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Michael. It's good to see you all. Hello, John. I look forward to meeting you and Andrew in person. Can you hear me okay? Okay. All right. Well, you know, I was blessed to work with nearly all the beats. I did a lot of work with Allen Ginsberg and with Gregory Corso and with David Amram and Herbert Huncke and And I stood at Kerouac's grave in Lowell with his only child, with Jan, for her one and only visit there. And I work with Baraka and Diane DePrima and Ed Sanders and Ann Waldman but Kerouac and Jack and Neil were gone before I entered the fray. It was right after their death that I opened the first underground bookstore in Kentucky and had a head shop. It's called, I named it For Madmen Only. And after the Magic Theater and Herman Hesse's Steppenwolf, published in 1927, and the head shop was named The Store. And but we sold all the City Lights books. I sold all the books I read myself and wanted to read, and records and vinyl records. And I had been reading them. You know, I just turned 70. Was born on Thanksgiving Day, November 23rd, 1950. But I was reading about them growing up on the farm and read everything I could get my hands on. But I never realized when I was running that underground bookstore and reading their work and reading everything I could get my hands on that interested me, and that I would one day become friends with them and work with them, edit and publish and share the stage and the page with them. And so it was a great honor. And Hunter S. Thompson was one of those people. I produced the official Hunter S. Thompson tribute. And I brought in Hunter and Johnny Depp and Warren Zevon and his mom and son and so many others. But Harry Smith, as much as I wanted to meet him, he was one, it just didn't happen. So he's one of the people I just had to read about and hear stories about. So many amazing stories. So that's just one of the many reasons I'm here, because Michael invited me. And, you know, I want to hear anything Michael has to say. And, but also I've always been curious about, I want to know as much as possible and more about Harry Smith. So that's why I'm here.
Ron, I don't know if you got on the broadcast right at the beginning, but I felt that I had to talk to Michael and John because they knew Harry, and I told them I had to catch a contact buzz from them. But I think there's a what do they say? It's like we're eating leftovers, and John's bringing you know, and I've got a stale donut, and Michael's got some rice that he made, and John's got this 3-day-old cabbage, and we're gonna sit down and have this party. So where did Ron, where did Harry land for you? Because I feel the same way. Like, I met John at Naropa, and I remember, I think it was John. I think it was Richard Loringer who first told me about Harry, and that memory kind of resurfaced, a little bit later. And I think it was the being in his presence really was something for you guys that, because I mean, of everything that I've learned today on this call. And of course, I asked you guys to give kind of the 101. So I was hearing you guys paraphrase things that I've been reading in my own studies these last 3 or 4 months of getting more into the Harry thing. But it was the Stan Brakhage film screening, with that band from Texas. And I'm such a prude now. I don't even want to say the first part of their band name, but I saw them lots of times. My head ripped off my face ripped off my head at St. Andrews Hall in Detroit, seeing them play live. And I was like higher than a kite. And I said, oh, this is why people love this band. It was the same thing with the Grateful Dead. It's like, oh, this is why these guys are so important to us. And then, you, Michael, talking about the log and the stone and the tape recorders. And so what, we've been at this now for an hour. So we're gonna bring this thing in the next probably 20 minutes or so into some kind of a crash landing, and we'll post it up online for our friends to listen to. So Ron, since you Michael invited you, you showed up on the screen, and I popped you into the chat. You mentioned Hunter S. Thompson, Amiri Baraka, Diane DePrima. So you mentioned this, and you're working in a bookstore, and you're trying to get other people to read this stuff if you're a proprietor of books. Where in your beat poetry, countercultural pantheon, where does Harry fit in? And I know, at least in today's conversation, we see him as a kind of like as a step uncle to everything about Americana music and folk music and psychedelic music that's great about American. So I think, and I've been obsessed with Dylan and the Dead, the Dead since '87 when I saw them, Dylan since my parents let me play their Free Will and Bob Dylan album when I was about 9. So where does Harry Smith fit in for you, Ron? And let's maybe Michael and John, while Ron's talking, why don't you all be thinking about some things that we need to sort of not wrap this thing up, but to sort of spin this thing out, a little bit further, so that anybody who gets off this reading will want to, or this listening will want to go out and do some excavating and exploring on their own. So Ron, where does Harry Smith fit for you in relation to all these other great writers and artists that you mentioned, including Hunter S. Thompson, who we hadn't brought up yet today, because I certainly think Fear and Loathing is out there in the multiverse for people to experience.
Well,
Ron?
Hunter had the greatest respect for the Beat Generation and was friends with them, and we had some long talks about the individual members of the so-called Beat Generation. But Harry, to me, is almost like Benjamin Franklin in regards to the foundation of our country. He's that great mystery, and he's the original. I mean, nobody can label or tag him in any way, no matter how hard they try. And he's constantly, destroying and creating, the original creator who's ripping it up and starting brand new. But he was everything. But he didn't give a damn except for the experience of creation. And that, to me, is central to where my interest in the Beat Generation lies, and Hunter S. Thompson and anybody. I believe that we all have a river, a nonstop river of creative fire flowing through us, no matter what society attempts to do to us to believe otherwise. The Beat Generation, like they go back to the beginning of time. The poet in ancient Greek meant creator, as in creator with equal to God in the creative world, and was regarded as an equal to the king. And Harry Smith, to me, he's a member of that direct lineage, going back to the beginning of time as we know it, where in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And Harry Smith was the Word, as far as I'm concerned.
I think, Ron, I think the anthology has a canonical status like few other documents in pop culture do. So I'm with you all the way. Tony Torrance says hello. I'm trying to get Tony and Leanne to hop on the actual live stream before we check out. They might not be dressed for live stream, I don't know, for prime time today, but we're so glad they're listening in. And this is going to be archived later as a podcast as Ordinary Takes number 6, talking about Harry Smith with John Wright, Michael White, and Ron Whitehead. Ron Whitehead, we have a request for a poem for you from Leanne and Tony, and then Michael and John are going to help me land this spaceship ungracefully in some other constellation. So, Ron, read us a poem, and then I'm gonna drop you off the stream and let John and Mike take us out. But Ron, give us a poem.
This is perfect timing, because tomorrow night I will be doing a Zoom with David Amram, the composer for the Beat Generation. He did so much with them. He introduced the French horn to jazz, and he's one of the greats. He just turned 90. David and I have done so much work together in Europe and the U.S. and worked together. Tomorrow night, I'm his special guest on a Sunday night. He's reading Offbeat, collaborating with Kerouac, and he's reading a section in the book for the audio recording. It's recorded and documented, and so he's reading this chapter in the book about the work he and I have done together at performing in Europe, the U.S. at Insomniacathons. I produced these 24, 48, 72, 90-hour nonstop music and poetry Insomniacathons from New York to New Orleans, Kentucky, the Netherlands. I produced the first one in Estonia last year. And so I wrote a poem I'm going to be reading with David's accompaniment tomorrow night, and it's titled Keep the Funk, Shooting Up Poetry in New Orleans. Okay, I'm going to run to the other room and get the poem. I just printed it. Hold on. I count to 5.
John, be thinking about what songs you want to play, and Michael, you're next when Ron's done with his poem.
Okay.
1996, and I'm in New Orleans standing outside the Howlin' Wolf Club. I'm here to produce yet another Beat Generation spirited 48-hour nonstop music and poetry Insomniacathon, and I've been burning up the road day and night with no end in sight. I'm feeling burnt out, tired to the bone, so I'm searching for a fix of poetry to shoot into my blood to rejuvenate my spirit. I'm calling on Jack Kerouac and Neil Cassidy and Bill Burroughs, but I haven't found my orgone accumulator, my new poetry yet, and my head is hanging so low it's dragging the ground. I've known nothing but failure lately, and I've been burning the candle at both ends so long there's nothing left of me but smoke and ashes. So I'm wondering if the time has finally arrived for me to become cinder for that long distance, never-ending railroad track to nowhere. My spirit screams out for help, and in a flash, I hear Allen Ginsberg whisper, "Take a hand, share the word." And out of the blue, the poetry gospel starts flowing through my groin and my gut and my heart and my head. And my, oh my, I jump and shout and sing. Yes, right in front of the Howlin' Wolf Club. I'm grabbed hold of by the poetry spirit, and now someone's singing and banging on a piano. So I open the door and peek in, and lo and behold, there's David Amram doing double note crossovers and over and unders. He's doing his ooh la mala walla and zoo ya ya. He's playing and scat singing in tongues right here in the middle of the holy New Orleans afternoon. And out of the blue, I find the poetry I've been looking for. I look up, and there's the full moon smiling at me from over the Mississippi River. And I think of Algiers and Bill Burroughs and Jack Kerouac and Neil Cassidy. And I think of Neil's flame gone, his naked body lying beside those long distance, never ending railroad tracks to nowhere. And I hope all the poets and musicians performing at this 48-hour nonstop music and poetry Insomniacathon, hell, I hope all of us keep the funk, keep that creative flame alive. Don't let the system break you. Don't let life break you. And I hear David Amram playing that piano and singing his Pull My Daisy and Never Give Up blues. And in that moment, I know my reward is in the experience of poetry. And right here, right now, I'm in New Orleans with all these poets and musicians who somehow know the magical power of poetry. The word sets us free. And I think about Allen Ginsberg and what he said about taking somebody's hand, because we're all in this together. We're pulling. We ain't pushing. We're letting it be. We realize that when one of us is lifted up, we're all lifted up. And I realize that poetry is life and life is poetry. And I feel an energy rising through me, growing strong, coming from poets and musicians of all ages. And I don't feel like failure anymore. I feel good. I feel strong. I feel reborn into poetry, into life. And it feels like resurrection, rebirth into poetry right here, right now. Keep the funk, shooting up poetry in New Orleans.
All right.
So everybody, you are listening to Ordinary Takes number 6. It's a podcast and a live stream co-produced by Teacher on the Radio and Ordinary Space. fanzine, and I'm teacher on the radio, Andrew Smith. That was Ron Whitehead, an impromptu visitor. Ron, I'm going to bid you farewell from the stream. You can stay in the backstage area and listen if you don't have a way to listen otherwise. And Michael White, over to you. We're going to start to wind this spiral dance into some kind of a culminating moment. So, Ron,
Sure.
Thank you again for joining the stream, and you're listening to Ordinary Takes.
Hey, Ron. Thanks, man.
I'm Andrew, and here's Michael White.
Okay. Well, we've talked a lot about Harry's music, but we didn't get into his films, and his films are just as revolutionary as the music. But maybe we can do another one, someday on Harry's films.
Say something right now. Now. So
just briefly, Harry totally innovated. I mean, he was just the incredible innovator. And in the 40s, Harry would take film, a roll of film, and lay it across his table and had a bright light over it. And he painted frame by frame onto the film. And nobody had done that. And he didn't capture images, through camera lenses. He painted onto the film. And frame by frame by frame by frame by frame. So imagine what it took to do that. And his work is the most incredible abstract art. Here's an example of one frame. And, there's thousands of frames. And then when he runs them, they move and move in beautiful ways. And I got to watch Harry present it once, and he presented it on 2 TV screens, one a little higher than the other. And the picture would move from the one TV to the other, and then the music would get in. He would play any kind of music, and the music would go in sync to the images. Every now and then, of course, across this stuff, the music and the movement of the images would just fall into place in a beautiful synchronistic way. So I've written a little bit about Harry, and as my final tribute to Harry, I'd like to read just a couple of paragraphs of my tribute to Harry. So Harry's clarity had something of the eagle soaring in the expanse of the sky, and something of the salmon leaping out of the water and back into the depths. Harry would look at me with his watery blue eyes, reflecting his own sadness and the emptiness of the world, and the amazing transformation of his poverty and his Spartan existence into some sort of palatial grandeur. Harry could discover the art in any situation. His vision could penetrate the mundane and bring forth the sublime. He saw the magnificence of what was otherwise ordinary. He penetrated the veil and imbued the commonplace with an extraordinary sense of delight and fascination. He was an esoteric master living in total disguise. Talking to Harry was a lesson in detachment and intuition. He picked up on cues and associations and followed tangents that carried the conversation into mazes and pathways that twisted and turned and revealed technicolor wonders at each new vista. He would officiate with a Cheshire grin and a very wry sense of humor. So that was just a sense of what it was like to be around Harry.
John, why don't you say a couple more words, however you feel the spirit of Harry is moving you now, and sing us another song, too. Oh, wait.
Got unmuted.
Oh, there you go.
I had a question for Michael. I seem to recall that in the 40s, Harry was admitted to the surrealists, like Andre Breton or whoever was the gatekeeper, oh, okay, this American guy, he's in the club. Is that's your
That's right. Now this is all rumor, but they say that Harry did a 2-man show with Andre Breton in Paris, and that Harry was the only American who ever got to display his art along with the surrealists in Paris. So Harry's graphic art was just incredible, surreal in a way not like Salvador Dali or the other surrealists, totally Harry and totally abstract, totally with color and form in ways that nobody had ever done before. And then he took it from there and took it onto film and then made it move.
A lot of his artwork was lost. Like I've heard that many of his paintings have sadly, yeah. yeah, people as a visual and graphic artist. That's like one other facet of him that he. Michael, did you ever see this? That he could, even when he was like this, wizened old man, he could draw perfect circles with a pen or something, just like you were using a compass, just sketching on a piece of paper, just one perfect circle after another. That one of his paintings.
Yes, from the 50s in San Francisco, very early work.
Okay,
a little glimpse of Harry's work there.
And he would go and hear like Dizzy Gillespie play and be painting like off to the sides of the stage. Like he would go listen to the bebop artists and paint at the same time.
And he said he could capture every note with a movement of his pen, and so his art reflected the free form of jazz innovation, and he loved the jazz guys. He loved Monk and all those jazz guys. And when he got to New York, he just felt like he was in heaven, because he could go up to Harlem and hear Monk every night, and hear John Coltrane and hear Miles and all the great jazz guys. And his art had that same sense of beauty and innovation that those guys had in their music.
So you used the word polymath, John, earlier. And some people might not be familiar with that term, but it technically means somebody who has a knowledge that spans a substantial variety of subject matter. And then people might use the term Renaissance man, but I hate that term.
Yeah.
I think, help me out here. Maybe you guys, let's freestyle here for a minute. I'm thinking radical, intuitive generalist. Somebody who has that funnel, that kind of emotional, spiritual, intellectual funnel for data and gooey fun stuff. Silly string and bubbles, and I'm trying to
paper airplane.
Exactly.
And string figures. He went nuts for string figures. He was an expert on string figures. Seminole Indians.
Like collections of
quilts. On and on.
And just one thing that struck me about him is that whatever your thing was at the time that you knew about, like he knew more about it than you.
Than you did.
And when most of the time when I was hanging out with him, like my thing was Gaelic poetry. I was like obsessed with that. I was like trying to learn Gaelic and so Harry, do you know about and of course he knew about it, and he had like books on people that he would never let me borrow, of all those books stacked up in his room, and so that was just like his knowledge was just so vast of like every topic.
And Michael, you said that thing, famous to the famous but unknown by everybody else. Like that was then. Now we live in this world where everybody wants to be into that band that you've never heard of. Everybody wants to follow that Twitter account that no one else. Today feels like a time. And there is a revival, clearly, that Dust to Digital release. And Amanda, who I invited, who's a famous writer who did not say yes to the coming on the podcast, she had other plans. She didn't have the dignity to respond to my email, which was awesome. Thank you, Amanda, if you're listening to this podcast now, for answering my email. But she just wrote an article in the New Yorker that Hari Kunzuru I mentioned, that novelist. He talks about, people are talking about Harry. He's swimming. But I think it's okay now for the obscure to not remain obscure, because I think, John, what you said, and Chris Funkhauser took issue with it in the comments, where you compared it to people now listening to Nirvana and Wu-Tang Clan,
That's not quite,
No, but I think you were right. I think you were right insofar as at the time that was pop music. I mean, those were the records that were being sold at that time, 27.
The Carter family, Lionel and Jefferson were big artists in their
that's right.
And something about what people have tried to separate, because I'm really interested in Alan Lomax too, but people who have tried to separate Alan Lomax from Harry Smith was that this was pop culture. Harry Smith was just giving his favorite tracks to Mo Ash for money, because he needed some money. It was a sale, and it wasn't him going and spending, like Lomax would go to like the prison or to the church, and he would record the prison songs in the prison. He would go to the church and record the church songs in the church. This is a little bit different.
And he did that with like the Kiowa peyote songs. He did field recordings. He went out and found the stuff like that.
He was the first guy to record Zydeco. Harry was.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
As a huge, like, from Louisiana. It's like, okay.
But the distinction, John, all I was saying was with the anthology. The distinction with the anthology was this was literally him sharing before we had all these other methodologies for sharing. It was him literally saying, here's my record collection.
Yeah.
Let me share it with you.
This is great. This is important. This is the music you need to be listening to, and I want to share it with you. And rather than this gatekeeper, like, well, I know this obscure music that you've never heard of, and
But even more, it was to explode a bomb in society.
Yeah.
It was the dynamite of culture. It was to blow things up and to open the door to immense streams of creativity, both in film and in music. And that's what makes Harry, famous to the famous, because he set those bombs off and they exploded, and culture changed as a result.
And I think there's something about studying Harry being an obsession seems to fit Harry, So who are into Harry's into Harry the way that we're into Harry is kind of what I feel.
One other thing I wanted to say is that, and maybe this is kind of breaking down now, is that for so many years there were these like kind of separate worlds. There were the filmmakers who knew about him, and I've met people and they're like, "Wow, you knew Harry Smith?" I was like, "Well, kind of." I was like, "Well, he also did this really cool music stuff, and that's what I'm interested in." So they don't know, when he was living in Europa, the local goth kids in Boulder would show up at his door because they'd heard that there was this guy who was this great mystic and an archbishop in the OTO or something, and so they would show up and hope he would do some black magic with them, and he would tell them to get lost. But so they're like all these different realms of people.
Yeah, that's one area that I haven't really, I mentioned in passing, he's a magi and he's a shaman and all this stuff. But what about all that? Like, because I was just reading, he was interested in Aleister Crowley and stuff. So so what?
That was his father. He claimed
that. That's right. He claimed to be the illegitimate child of Aleister Crowley. There's nothing to it. It's not true at all.
And Princess Anastasia, that was his mother. Supposedly he was like the love child of those two.
That's right. And one of Aleister Crowley's books has a Harry Smith artwork on the cover. It's the Holy Book of Thema has Harry Smith on the cover. So
if you were trying to explain it, and Michael, you try first because I know you are a bit of a theologian in your own way. And I'm a theologian, and I feel just this magnetism from Harry that's just very. And Ron, when he was still on the chat, started quoting the Gospel according to St. John, verse 1, chapter 1, in light of the folk anthology. I was just like, oh my God! I'm like, all my words are colliding. In the beginning was Harry Smith, and Harry Smith was in the beginning. So, but what do you? That word, I love that word mystic, but we throw it around. It's so overused, like everybody who's been to a yoga class, and sure they should be, but from your perspective, and I'm not against throwing it around either. I'm happy to throw it around, but from your perspective, Michael, and having known him, what about Harry made him, what was it, a childlike thing, or what was it about him as an artist and as a polymath that made him a mystic? Why is that a word that we have to include in that long list of the things that he was?
Yeah. He definitely had, that's another aspect that we haven't even begun to explore yet, is he was a bishop in an esoteric church. And he had the credentials to the real credentials in that tradition. And when he arrived in New York City, he was so happy to find Weiser Bookstore. And I remember in the 80s, I got to visit at Weiser Bookstore, and it was the most esoteric bookstore in New York City and probably in the world, and had incredible collections of every kind of esoteric stuff. And Harry knew all that stuff. He knew the Egyptian, he knew the Native American, he knew the Aleister Crowley black magic stuff, and he knew the Christian myth, and I don't think he knew much on Buddhism and yoga, but in the Western esoteric traditions, Harry was a hidden master, and Harry had the most beautiful sense of detachment and cared about nothing in the material world except creation and collecting information and synthesizing that information into art forms and new art forms that would explode into the culture and bring forth whole new streams of realization and enlightenment and liberation for all of us.
So some of the stuff I've been reading definitely suggests that the mixtape itself now is its own genre. It, like a collage, is a legit genre of art, and I teach it as a curricular. It is really now the mixtape is starting to become kind of the undergirding of my entire syllabus. It's the course I teach is called American Literature, but I'm kind of teaching it as an American Studies class, but because we don't have American Studies, and it is what it is. But I think he might have kind of invented what we now think of as the mixtape. And John, we talked about that at the beginning of the call a little bit in passing, but that's kind of why Harry Smith is so important, is because he's kind of when you talked about him painting on the movie, I mean, he was inventing a genre. And I think Ron kind of said he's the OG. I think I might have heard Ron say that Harry Smith is the OG. So Harry Smith is the OG before they had the OG. John, how about a song, man? I feel like we're getting close to the benediction. What Michael just said felt a lot like the benediction. We've been out at this for almost 100 minutes now, so we are going to start to crash our spaceship soon. But or is it a wagon train, a mule train? I don't know what it is we're riding on right now. A horse and buggy train. But play us another song, John.
Okay, I'll do one by from the anthology by Bascom Lamar Lunsford. And Leanne and Tony, if you're still out there, then you'll remember a few years ago when we were down in North Carolina and we went to find his grave in this little town outside of Asheville. And he was a musician from the Asheville area and had a lot to do with kind of the folk music revival down there. So that's kind of interesting that getting connected with Harry Smith and listening to the music that he put together would lead me someday to be looking on my phone for like find a grave and using the GPS to find where Bascom Lamar Lunsford is buried. Anyway, so this is one of his songs called "I Wish I Was a Mole in the Ground."
Great song.
And it's Harry on his anthology Divided Songs. That there were ballads, which like kind of told a story, had some kind of narrative, like The Wagoner's Lad, and then there were songs, which were more lyrics, which were just these kind of disconnected lyrics with maybe some kind of a theme or something. And so this is one of the songs. I wish I was a mole in the ground. I wish I was a mole in the ground. Yes, wish I was a mole in the ground. I say, mole in the ground, I'd root that mountain down. Oh, wish I was a mole in the ground. Oh, Kempy wants a $9 shawl. Yes, Kempy wants a $9 shawl. I come over the hill with a $40 bill saying, baby, where you been so long? 'Cause where have you been so long? Yes, where have you been so long? Oh, I've been in the bend with a rough rowdy men know. So baby, where you been so long? Man, I don't like a railroad man. Yes, don't like a railroad man. 'Cause a railroad man kill you when he can and drink up your blood like wine. Oh, can't you let your hair roll down? Yes, can't you let your hair roll down? Let your hair roll down, your bangs curl around. Oh, Skimpy, let your hair roll down. And I wish I was a lizard in the spring. Yes, I wish I was a lizard in the spring. I was a lizard in the spring, I'd hear my darling sing. Oh, wish I was a lizard in the spring. And I wish I was a mole in the ground. Yes, I wish I was a mole in the ground. I was a mole in the ground, I'd root that mountain down. Oh, I wish I was a mole in the ground.
So what's going to happen next is that I'm going to archive this thing and we're going to put it up on all places that the internet will host it, and it will try to stay up on the internet till it will outlast us. Hopefully it'll still be there for our grandchildren. So, oh, well, remember when great grandpa was on the internet and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so this has been an episode of Ordinary Takes, which is a podcast hosted by Teacher on the Radio and Ordinary Space fanzine. And my guests today have been Michael White of Brush Creek, Tennessee, and John Wright of suburban Detroit, Michigan. All of us were at one time temporary residents of the Jack Kerouac School in Boulder, Colorado, where both of my guests had the immense pleasure of knowing the great Harry Smith. And we had a special guest from living beat poet of Kentucky, Ron Whitehead, and look him up. Apparently he's been hosting marathon poetry readings, 72 hours, I think they called it, insomniacathons on the internet. So Ron White is a man after my heart, and I'm so grateful Ron Whitehead. I'm so glad that Michael White, we've got White, Wright, and Whitehead, and Smith. we could form a law firm, Smith, White, and Whitehead. Oh, Lord have mercy. All right, so I want to try something new. And I just, as we're wrapping this up, and it probably doesn't even belong on the podcast, but what the heck, right? Because I want to use a little bit of maybe slight excerpt of this on the radio. I'm going to do a live radio show on actual radio, 88.5 FM, Tennessee Tech Radio next Saturday, where I'm going to play suggestions of songs that all of you send me. I'll put the playlist together during the next 7 days, and at 11 a.m., same time as we tried to start today. It'll be on WTTU 88.5 FM Cookeville, and it does stream. The best way to listen to it streaming is using the TuneIn app, and you can listen to it up there in Detroit. But Michael and John, for that purpose, would you guys each do me a really quick radio ID? I used to do those, and I haven't done them in years. So say, hey, I'm John Wright, and you're listening to Teacher on the Radio on 88.5 FM WTTU in Cookeville, Tennessee. And Michael, would you do one for me too? And I'll rip those from the podcast into the broadcast next Saturday, and then we'll start to crash this spaceship or log train or whatever. Runaway railroad train without brakes, whatever this is that we've been doing for the last 100 minutes now that we've been at it. Would you all do me that favor and give me a radio ID if you need me to say it again real slow what it is?
Say it again. I think I have most of it. Say it again.
So it's going to be, you're listening to the Teacher on the Radio program on 88.5 FM. Next guests, I'll send it to them in advance. On 88.5 FM, WTTU, Cookeville, Tennessee. John, you go first, and then Michael, you go second. John?
Okay. Hi, this is John Wright, and you're listening to the Teacher on the Radio on 88.5 FM, WTTU Radio, Cookeville, Tennessee.
Michael White, happy to be talking about Harry Smith on the Teacher on the Radio program on 88.5 WTTU, Cookeville, Tennessee.
You guys did so great, and I will probably. My editing skills are not the best, but I'll try to excerpt a few moments from this glorious podcast into next Saturday's radio program for anybody that missed it. So, parting last couple of words. We'll go backwards this time. Michael and then John.
Well, I just say thank you, Andrew, for hosting this and inviting me, and thanks for letting Ron Whitehead read one of his poems. That was a real treat. So thank you, Ron, and I hope we've inspired some people to go on YouTube and watch some Harry Smith videos, or pull up some Harry Smith anthologies of American folk music and dig into that stuff. It's beautiful stuff. It's the old weird America.
Andrew, thanks for bringing us together, and I just love hearing from different people who knew Harry and getting different perspectives and hearing the stories, like always, the funny, poignant stories about him. So thanks for putting this together, and all the tech glitches we had at the beginning. I'm glad it finally came together for everybody.
So this has been Ordinary Takes, and John Wright and Michael White and Ron Whitehead have been my guests today, and this will be put out there on all places that I am on the internet, but you can follow Teacher on the Radio and Ordinary Space on Facebook, so you can get notified of future live streams, and we're going to be live streaming every other Saturday, and on the alternating Saturdays, I'll be doing live radio. So for the foreseeable future, Saturday at 11 a.m. is when I'll be on some form of broadcast platform sharing my passion for music and pop culture. And the new Smithsonian's, yet again, they're re-releasing again the same CD they re-released back in the 90s and sold out of. So keep an eye out for all of the Harry Smith books and releases coming soon. But the Anthology of American Folk Music is coming out again from Smithsonian Folkways. And if you're not familiar with Smithsonian Folkways, what a great place to find out about traditional and folk music that's happening in the tradition that Harry Smith was a part of. So we're going to sign off for today, and hopefully we'll see you all on a future live stream. Look up Michael White's books under the name J.M. White, and John Wright. I'm sure we'll be in better touch now than we have been the last 30 years since we met at the Jack Kerouac School. Everyone have a beautiful afternoon.